Good afternoon, members. We will begin our meeting, the second meeting of the IOC. It's good to see everybody here this afternoon. Before we start, let's go ahead and stand, if you will, for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will, for the most part, follow the agenda we have and try to move as expeditiously as we can. So for section number 2, we're going to have public comment. And if there are members of the public who would like to come and address the committee, if you will come up to the lectern there and give your name and where you're from, and limit your comments to 3 minutes, please. We will take public comment if there is any. I know there's one. All right. However order you want to go, come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Newitt, and I live in Seffner, and I have worked for my whole history here in Hillsborough County with the environmental community. I'm on boards and member of groups like the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida, as well as Sierra Club, ELAP, and many other groups. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody. I look around the room and I see a lot of familiar faces, and I know everybody's got particular ideas and direction in mind for this money that hopefully we're going to get a chance to spend in some new opportunities here in Hillsborough County. And I just wanted to say and bring out in the early part of this conversation, and I read the other day that the commissioners voted to go ahead and start finding some directions for this money. And I realize it's still in court and that it'll be finalized sometime. But I just wanted to say that outside of this room and the people involved here, it would be wonderful if some of the money, I saw some's going to be able to go to like hiking trails and maybe bike paths and pedestrian safety and some other things beyond the concrete roads that usually all the money gets swept into. And it would be nice if some of the wonderful environmental groups that exist and have meetings and work on all kinds of cleanups and water and other things here in Hillsborough County, if they got a chance to maybe participate a little bit in the directions that this money is going to go to, from the South County all the way to the Bay. You know, there's a million different issues that all could use some support. And I know this for one time, we're going to have a pile of money that I would imagine will probably be bonded out. And so, you know, there'll be big pieces going to different directions. And I think it'd be wonderful if, like Sierra Club and ELAP and different people could weigh in and maybe see if they could earmark some of these funds to work on some longer-term issues that could have a bigger long-term effect. You know, people that ride bikes, they know where the biking trails are. But if the trails are there, a lot of other people might come. And so maybe if we could work on some of these long-term environmental issues here, not just fixing stuff that is broken, but maybe creating some things that would give us a little bit of a new horizon, I think it'd be really wonderful, and it'll help us all be remembered for something that people really appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Stick around. I know we're going to be talking about some of the public input process, so that'll answer directly some of your concerns. Do we have anybody else from the public? Don't be shy, man. You were here practicing when I got here, so.
Yeah, I was trying to cut the meeting short. I'm trying to cut my speech short. All right, I'm gonna go really fast. I'm sorry.
Give us your name and then go
My name's Jose, and I earned my master's urban planning at USF, the master's degree. Last name? Salazar. All right. Now, at this moment, the only thing you really need to know about me is that I don't believe in rebuilding our infrastructure, transportation, carpet. It is time to redesign. I also know that the bicycle transportation building and maintenance is far less expensive than the car transportation building and maintenance. Now, before I go on, I want to let you know I watched your first meeting online, and I noticed your committee is struggling to find its identity, its role, its differences compared to that of the Planning Commission, so there wouldn't be any authority overlapping that would inevitably lead to infighting. This committee is also trying to find its footing when individuals and neighborhoods come here with their needs and wants. I want to let you know this is not an obstacle. This is not a challenge. This is a unique opportunity to change our path about what we're doing or change it away and redesign away from the car. Now, one of my personal saying is this: most people know where they're at. They don't know when they're at in the cycle of things. Now, in the life cycle of living area, we have grown from a farm and a horse to the monocentric in the car, and now we have grown into the polycentric and this is the opportunity to redesign, not rebuild. Now, defining the path we're on, our transportation system is almost all car-dominated, congested, and choking our living space in so many different ways. All we have to do is look at the car congestion transportation system in the northeast of this country, look towards Europe, look towards China, and other so-called developing centers. Look past the smog and see that the car is the common problem to all. Now, if you put on your economic eyes and look out the window, you will see a growing economic class and families, individuals who have a car to maintain a job, to maintain the job to have the car. All right, now close your eyes and imagine if they didn't have a car expenditure. Imagine if the city didn't have a car expenditure. Imagine how much stronger this economic can be if there was a true alternate form of transportation, like the bicycle transportation system, a true bicycle transportation. To this community, this is a unique opportunity to change from the path we're on. This is an opportunity to redesign away from the car and build a true alternate form of transportation system. Now, to let you know, Los Angeles, I don't know if it's Los Angeles or the county of Los Angeles, has decided not too long ago to dedicate 100% of its transportation budget away from the car and to build a true alternate form of transportation system. Now, I know what's for me. I will come to you in the future because I already designed a true alternate form of transportation system based on USF, where the students can get up the car and the bicycle and return, be able to go to school almost for free. Now, I have done a survey over there, and almost all of them have said yes, they want it. And now, I do not know if this committee has a vision or mission statement, but if it does, it must state this committee that it knows when it stands in the life cycle of the Tampa Bay living area and know it is time to redesign away from the car. It must encourage transportation answers that are designed to reduce the car population, and a lot of problems will disappear. Now tonight, think about this before you close your eyes for the night. In redesigning, you do not need more money. All you need to do is redesign it away from this old way of car transportation, which costs a lot more money, towards the new way of a bicycle transportation system. Now we're heading towards what we are doing and avoid what we're heading towards what we're doing, like other cities are, with the same problems. Now remember, the bicycle transportation system is far less expensive than the car.
I'm trying to let you go, sir, but you got to wrap it up. I'm sorry.
One sentence, that's it. All right, thank you, by the way. Now, I want to finish with this. We're not inherited this world from our ancestors. We are caretakers for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
All right.
We have any other public comment?
Very quickly, I just wanted to say.
Give us your
Actually,
name.
I'm sorry, Bonnie Newitt, and I live in Seffner, Florida. I just want to say, sort of as he was saying, this is an opportunity, and I hope that we can use this money to get cars off the road. And I'm really looking forward, hopefully, some of it will be put to light rail. Coming from Chicago, I grew up there. I just know, everybody depends on the light rail, and there are, a lot less cars on the road because of it. And I know some people are not so much for the light rail, but I've seen, I've been in an environment where it's made all the difference in the world. And I'm also from the environmental community, and we just need to get cars off the road and make it easy for people. And so I'm just pushing light rail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, David Smith, 401 East Jackson Street, with the firm of Gray Robinson, here as General Counsel for the Hillsborough Transit Authority. I know I sent a memorandum to each of you, but sometimes it's not as clear in written form. I wanted to make sure I was clear on the points I was trying to make, which are very simple. Essentially, it's this. Since we're in litigation, I want to make sure this body makes a clear finding when it makes a finding with respect to the plans that are submitted to it. And I apologize, you have eminent counsel who's probably going to tell you the same thing, and you also have eminent counsel on the board. But what I want to make sure happens, because we've been litigating with these individuals for quite a while, I don't think they're going to go away easily. So I just want to make sure that we have the best possible set of findings when you take action to review and certify the plans. The judge, as you know, took away your power to approve, but left in the language that says you certify. Now, what that distinction may be might be a little bit elusive. It certainly is to me. But it's important, I think, that when you review the plans and certify them as compliant with Article 11, it seems a lot like approval. So if ultimately the court overturns it and restores your approval process, I just want to make sure that the way you articulate your certification is strong enough and clear enough so that it complies with whatever outcome we have from the appellate process. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. That's why I wanted to speak.
Right. Before you take your seat, I would ask, do any committee members have any questions for Mr. Smith? Go ahead, Mr. Fletcher.
So my main question would be, will you or will someone from the county attorney's office be working to provide us with a recommendation as to how those recommendations and findings should be styled? Because I would look to counsel to assist us with making sure that that's done properly.
It would be Sam Hamilton, your counsel. I just wanted to make sure that Hillsborough Transit Authority had an opportunity to be heard in public on the issue. I don't believe we disagree at all with respect to what Article 11 does.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you. Any other public comment at this time? All right, thank you. Let's go to Section 3, which is vaguely labeled members' interests, and that's just to kind of talk about anything that we have to talk about in general, since we are here at a publicly noticed meeting. So does anybody have anything they want to talk about that is not specifically on the agenda? Now is your opportunity. Otherwise, we will move forward. Yes, Judge Menendez.
I wanted to apologize. I came in about a minute late because ironically, I didn't anticipate the traffic was going to be as bad as it was.
That is, in fact, ironic, yes. No problem. Yes, Rawls.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want staff, if they haven't reconciled the audit period with the plan period, I really think we need to focus on that. We're going to be auditing a September 30 year-end activity. The plans are going to be introduced based on a December activity. Guys, we're going to have a reconciliation nightmare unless we get this thing figured out up front. So I know that's how the law reads, but we need to know what our options are so that when and in fact, if I'm not mistaken, the audit is going to give us, we're going to rely on that to make sure that we're in compliance in many ways. Well, I don't know how you're in compliance with a September 30 year end and a September 30 period when the plans are going to be introduced, correct me if I'm wrong, with December year ends. Is that correct? Calendar year activity.
Sorry, can you say that again?
The plans that are going to be submitted to us from the various agencies, as I read it, will be based on calendar year assessments and collections, et cetera. But the audit period is going to be as of September 30, which I believe is the same or is coordinated with the agency year ends, which are all September 30th, correct? So I think we have, a mismatch there that we need to figure out how we're going to deal with up front, because we can waste an awful lot of time trying to reconcile an audit report with the information that we're supposed to be, as a body, we're responsible for determining if they're in compliance with the law. And the audit was named in the ordinance as part of the compliance strategy, but we're going to have plans submitted with a different database. So we really need to address that, in my opinion.
We reached out to a representative from the clerk's office and asked if they'd be willing to give a presentation at this meeting, actually, and they declined. They said that they weren't prepared to make a presentation to the committee just yet, but they offered to present at the following meeting, which would either be the October meeting or possibly waiting until January. I don't know if this seems like this is an urgent matter, so I can try to convey the urgency and ask if they'd be prepared to come next month. Do you think that would fit in with the timeline?
Thank you, and Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm certainly open to listening to other members of the committee and their thoughts on this. If they think I'm missing the boat on it, I'm certainly willing to listen to that, or if they have a solution to it. But I do believe that it could be a pretty good roadblock or speed bump that we may run into down the road. So just want to try and circumvent that. Thank you.
I don't know if any other committee members have I agree with you, and let's make sure that staff works with you to get that done, but I don't think it's a light request to the clerk's office. I think this has to be done so that we can be in compliance. Quite frankly, that's how I feel about it. I don't know if anybody else feels any different. Yeah, Mr. Fletcher.
No, I would agree wholeheartedly. I'm looking at the charter language. It does put this within the auspices of the clerk to provide that work and hence figure that out, I think.
Thank you.
Any other comments under members' interest before we go to approve the minutes? Yes, ma'am.
Chair. Yes, I wanted to clarify, in the last meeting regarding the form, I asked for some history behind projects that have occurred in that area, and I'm not exactly sure, I wanted to explain my intent behind that.
Which form are you talking about? I'm sorry.
The form for the proposals
Okay.
that we're going to be reviewing. My reasoning behind that was when the referendum went before the voters, it didn't earmark or it didn't have any specific projects or timelines or items that were deliverables. So it's kind of open-ended, and my intent is to ensure as a committee, if it's within our power, that the funds that are being generated are in addition to funds that should already be part of the budget, and that these funds are not used as an alternate source of funding for current projects.
Okay.
I'm glad that that issue was brought up. I was maybe going to wait till our next meeting, but I do have that same concern. I think that the voters, this was in addition to money, in my opinion, that the county already set out, $800 million for transportation improvements, not for them to take projects and try to make them fit into this criteria and use this money for that. That's what again, the reason I wanted to be on this committee is I think this is a once-in-a-generational chance. You know, the voters sent us a specific message. Whether I like it or not, we need to do what they asked us to do and not allow that to happen. So I think that's an issue that's going to come up. And we may not have the final word on that, but I think it's something that we need to be aware of, and I think it kind of undermines. I don't want this to be like the state lottery with education. I think that would be bad. You know, people had confidence in us, and we need to make sure that these issues are discussed.
I appreciate that. It's better that we talk about this now than when we get down the road. That's an important distinction, and that's what this committee is ultimately going to be operating under, how we feel about that. So I'm glad that came up. Yes, Judge.
Is that something that we can get a legal opinion from the county on?
Yes. If that's what you would like, we can certainly make that happen.
I would request that we do that.
Yes. All right. We're going to move now to section, oh, sorry, Senator.
One question that keeps coming up from people I run into is, how much is the lawsuit costing the taxpayers of Hillsborough County?
I got that question as well. Do we have any staff that can answer that question in the room? No? We don't. Let's see if we can get an answer to that by the next meeting, maybe. I've been asked that question several times as well. Any other comments? All right. We'll now move to section 4 on the agenda, which is the approval of the August 27th, 2019 minutes. If you will review those minutes in your packet, and when you are ready, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes as they are corrected here.
I have a correction to make.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry to bring up old wounds, but I voted against Mr. Fletcher and for Mr. Shaw. Sorry.
We certainly need to correct the record.
So I'm just concerned that maybe whoever did minutes had people mixed up or something. So I just wanted to be.
We'll make that correction. Thanks, Dustin.
I have 2
Judge.
points. One was that point, and if I recall correctly, Mr. Hunter made a nomination, which I seconded, of Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Fernandez then made a nomination of Mr. Shaw, which Ms. Joyner seconded, and then we voted. And it says here I voted no on something. I never voted no for anybody. I merely voted in favor of Mr. Fletcher. I didn't vote against Mr. Shaw. I don't think anybody in here voted against anyone, and it would seem to me that the wording of that in the minutes is somewhat misleading and I think inappropriate. And I'd like to see it changed to reflect that it's who nominated who, and then, the 8-5 was the vote, and who voted on the 8 and who voted on the 5. I don't think anybody voted no, either against Mr. Fletcher or against Mr. Shaw. So I would like that corrected. And then a very minor point, on the first page, there's a misspelling of my name. Manual is a book, not my name. It's E-L, not A-L.
We will reflect those corrections. I agree.
Thank you.
We even had a little statement about that when we were actually doing the voting, because no one voted no. I remember this discussion, so we'll fix that in the minutes. Yes, Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on the judge's comment about spelling of name, Johnny probably did this just to make sure I was paying attention. In the section of the minutes where I nominated Mr. Shaw, I think you referenced me as Hernandez rather than Fernandez.
Oh, I didn't do the minutes.
Okay, so whoever did it, if you could just correct the name change back to the F, I'd appreciate it.
Let me make sure that I have all these correctly. So Mr. Lemke voted for Sean Shaw, Bob Hunter nominated, Mr. Hunter nominated, whom was it?
Fletcher.
Mr. Fletcher. And Judge Menendez, you seconded that. You'd like to correct that. You didn't vote no for any of the nominees.
It should just be that certain people voted in the affirmative for certain candidates, and other people voted in the affirmative for other candidates. No one voted no, period. Right?
Yep.
Correct.
Judge, your name is misspelled on the first page, and Mr. Fernandez, your name is also misspelled.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I believe they also misspelled Miss Patrick. It should be Miss Kilpatrick. In items 7 and 8. I'm sorry, 7 and 9.
Yep. Page 2. Any other corrections to the minutes? Okay, I will certainly at this time accept a motion to approve the minutes with those corrections.
I move that we approve the minutes with the corrections as given.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say yay.
Yay.
All against? Thank you.
Hunter?
We will, we'll make those corrections. All right, let's get to the action portion of the agenda. This is section 5, action items. A, 2019-2020 meeting calendar. Dr. Wong, if you will discuss those dates.
Johnny Wong, MPO staff, and IOC support staff. So we're proposing a 2019-2020 meeting calendar for you all. I got the sense that you all were growing a little bit weary of the doodle poll, so we decided to propose a meeting schedule for the fourth Monday of certain months. So you'll see that the meetings that have already been held in August and today are reflected at the very top. With this proposal, the next meeting will be October 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. That will be the meeting where you will be reviewing the agency project plans and certifying them for compliance. November and December will be in recess. There's not much action required of this committee between reviewing the project plans and certifying for compliance, and then the April public hearing where you'll be reviewing the results of the audit. But we'd like to ensure that you all stay engaged in this process, so we're proposing an optional January meeting with no action items, so a quorum won't be necessary, but we could provide you with some information to get you prepared to receive that audit. And I got some suggestions from you all already. Mr. Rollerson, we'd like to reflect that you'd like to have a representative from the clerk's office come and make that presentation about reconciling the budget auditing process with the project plans process. The April 27th meeting will actually be the public hearing. You'll be receiving the results of the clerk's audit and receiving our annual report that the MPO will be providing. And then August 24th will be the next meeting to get you prepared to receive project plans for 2020. And then October 26th will be the date where you receive those plans and certify them once again. None of these dates are set in stone. We just wanted to throw out a proposal because it seemed easier to get feedback this way rather than sorting through the doodle polls.
Yes, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Wong, how many project plans do you anticipate we'll be reviewing on the 28th? And how far in advance of the meeting can we actually get copies of them?
So the agencies have to submit their project plans to us by September 30th, no later than that. Our plan is to package them all together, send you all the documentation that we've received so that you'll have the period between September 30th and October 28th to review, prepare any questions, and then on the 28th, we're going to invite agency representatives to come in, present what's in their project plans, and we intended to have them all be presented at the same time. So that would be Hart, Hillsborough County, City of Tampa, Temple Terrace, and Plant City.
I'd like to know if you consider any alternative date other than the 28th of October.
Nothing's set in stone. It's up to the will of the committee. If you all have an alternative date somewhere between September 30th and the end of October, I will be available and all staff will be available to host that meeting. It's just a matter of which day works best for all of you. Certainly a quorum is necessary. It would be ideal if we had full attendance.
This is a new process, obviously, because we haven't existed before, but the time of the meeting on the 28th and the number of projects, do you have any general sense of how that meeting will go, how long it will be, how many projects will be submitted to us, anything like that?
We've reached out to all of the jurisdictions and asked them to limit their presentations to about 15 to 20 minutes. That's a lot to cover in that short amount of time, but since you all are volunteering to serve on this committee, we didn't want to eat up a lot of your time, certainly not on a weeknight. But if you'd like to extend that, that's a possibility. If you have anything that you'd like to convey to the agency.
I would ask the committee if they believe this, but 15 minutes doesn't seem long enough. And we are volunteering, but we asked to be on this committee, so I'm willing to sit through more than 15 minutes if everybody else is. I think that is not enough time to do what we need to do per agency. That's my opinion. Yes, Ms. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Johnny, I would definitely echo that sentiment. I mean, I'm concerned and I appreciate your concern for our personal time, but it just seems like potentially a lot of work is going to be crammed into that 2-hour period, and how we could possibly get that done effectively, I can't imagine. My question really, though, is about the follow-on. We aren't, by the timeline projected in the referendum, we aren't required to provide our certifications at the conclusion of that October meeting and go away forevermore, right? We have a period of time in November and December during which we could review those and take action. Is that not correct?
I don't believe that's correct. I believe that you have to certify either compliance or fail to certify compliance on that date by the end of October.
By the end of October, that's the latest we have to make the certifications?
Sam, you have a clarification?
Good evening. Sam Hamilton, County Attorney's Office. There is nothing specifically in the charter language or the county ordinance with respect to the date you're looking for. That being said, when you read the document in its totality, setting aside the first plan year, given the litigation, what can be inferred, although again there is nothing specific in the charter amendment. What can be inferred is, since it's talking about a plan year that commences January 1st, and it also says agencies have to submit plans by the end of September, you have that 3-month window. So in theory, yes, if you wanted to have meetings October, November, December, logically to meet within that window, if you will, it would be by the end of this calendar year. Although, as I said earlier, there is nothing specific in the charter amendment that speaks to, by some date you have to approve it. But again, by inference, it would be by January 1st.
So that's one of the things that we're left to kind of make up as we go along and establish our own precedent by culture. Is that fair? Okay. Well, my only suggestion is that we may want to identify some potential dates in the trailing months, November and December, where we would have, meetings perhaps of a workshop nature to go over items that have presented to us in projects that we may have additional questions or issues about.
Right.
So that we're not forced into a corner in that 2-hour window in October.
Right. Apologize for that error.
No, that's,
Just for the clarification.
No, we're working.
we're all going to make them.
Work through it, Mr. Fletcher.
Just a couple thoughts. One is, there is a 30-day window, but it looks like that's for just plan amendments. It's not for the original plan approvals. So, so I guess that's just, we will have some timeframes at some point, but this initial one, I don't think we do. I would be interested more in figuring out what our process is going to be in reviewing them. That would help us understand how much time we're going to need to do that. I tend to agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said about timing. I'm not sure really what we're going to be doing. So is it 2 hours? Is it 4 hours? Is it 2 hours per agency? What will we be doing? And like you said, maybe a workshop to start would be better.
Any response to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point of clarification. The language that Mr. Fletcher referred to, though, that 30-day for amendments, was actually part of the language that was stricken by the trial court. So and it's also unique that that language is included, that 30-day window, but there is no corresponding timeframe within which plans have to be certified by this body. But again, that language, at least for the time being, is not part of the charter.
Mr. Hunter?
I just wanted to bring up, we keep talking about us reviewing this. I don't know if we know what we're reviewing from the standpoint that what are we going to be, what are the jurisdictions, and we're going to have to receive something from you. A list of projects. We need an explanation from you so we can make a decision. Is it, as for example, will it be a list of projects that have gone through a series of public input and public hearings that have been prioritized with funding sources, and it's coming from a jurisdiction, and we're going to have it from the 4 governments and HART, and we'll get all 5 of them submitted to us that evening, and we're going to say okay, or we're going to pull them out and continue discussing what? Reprioritizing what's already gone through a public hearing process, or what?
I can't speak to the prioritization process that each of the municipalities.
They have their own, but it'll be explained to us. I'm
That's
sorry.
right. They each have their unique prioritization process and criteria that they look at. However, I can say that the project plans that I have seen, which have been approved by the governing bodies already, include far more projects than a handful. City of Tampa is, I believe, I was reviewing today, and I'm not sure exactly how many are actually in there, but dozens. And the information that was in each included the project name, like the street from point A to point B, a project description of some amenities that could be included in each project. It showed the phase of the project that the surtax money was being used to fund. I believe it showed possibly the
Funding source.
year of expenditure and
Funding source.
which project category it fit into. Well, they were all funded through the surtax. They didn't include projects funded with other sources.
Yes, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I guess at this meeting, whenever we have it in October, we're going to get plans that the government has, one of the government agencies has already approved through its process.
Right.
What happens if, for whatever reason, this body feels that it should not certify a particular project? What happens to that project?
Then would you like to come speak to that? What happens if they fail to certify compliance?
I think it's a county commission, I think.
Would really depend upon, I guess, a couple of things. I mean, the particular government could seek an appeal. There is language in the interlocal agreement that was entered into among the various parties, the 3 cities, the county, HART, and the MPO. They could actually appeal a non-certification, if you will. And I think what the document provides for is it would be appealed to the county commission, for instance. They could see fit to agree. I mean, part of it's also a function of what the rationale is for the lack of certification or the denial of certification. But there is already a thought process, if you will, in place for some type of next step, an appeal process, if you will.
Thank you.
So my question would be, I mean, from your perspective, what is an appropriate basis for us to be reviewing these on? I mean, I read it, I look at this source of the funds and whether or not the project meets the criteria for that source of funds, and that's pretty much the limitation of our review, I think. But I guess that's what I was kind of looking for, is some help on what kind of a process we're going through, what are we deciding, what's the standard we're deciding against, and how in-depth we need to get to really make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I understood what you just to say. I mean, that my interpretation would be the same as that. It's a certification of compliance with what I'm going to call governing law. And I'm going to say that because there are really two components. First, the first component is the charter amendment as revised by the trial court. And as some of you may or may not know, last week there was a second component added. The county commission did enact an ordinance that placed what some refer to as the use buckets, which are actually the various categories for the expenditure of funds. There are two governments that are subject to the general purpose expenditure categories. That would be the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County. The two small cities, the smaller cities are not because of the amount of revenues they would receive from this. And then Hart has its own set of expenditure categories. Those have been put back in place, if you will, by the county commission, not as a formal amendment to the charter, that's a different process, but consistent with the trial court's order, they've been reinstated, if you will. So what the function of this body would be to look at a particular agency's project plan, see if it is consistent with those two documents, the various expenditure categories. Let me also point out what you will see, at least I know you will see it for Hillsborough County because I've seen the documentation. I would assume you will also see it with the other governments. There was another component of the interlocal agreement where the parties agreed to have either a professional engineer or a procurement official certify us to compliance. So that will likely also be in the package as well.
Chair, the portion that was reinstated by the county, did they completely reinstate what was stricken, or are there some portions that it did not address? And if so, is there some document you could provide that allows us to synthesize those two?
Yeah, we've provided it to staff. We can certainly get it to you. It's largely, most of it has been reinstated. There are a few areas there were concerns with the trial court ruling, one that was discussed earlier. The charter language, the amendment as originally passed by the voters with respect to this body's powers had approved project plans and certified compliance with the charter amendment. The approval language was not added back because there's a separate concern under the trial court's ruling that that's sort of just an ultra vires act to do that. So that was not included. There are a couple of other areas like that, but for the most part, most of the language was reinstituted. But we can certainly, we can provide that.
Yes, because the one thing that I wasn't sure about is outside of the allocation of the funds, the buckets, so to speak, there were other limitations that were taken away, like increasing lane capacity.
That's been reinserted. Those
Okay.
are all back in.
Okay.
I just want to reiterate the request for a legal opinion on this body's ability to certify projects, but taking into account the concerns that Mr. Chiramonte and Ms. Kilpatrick laid out. Because that's a big hump that we need to either get over or not. But we need to see that laid out in a legal analysis because that's going to affect our decisions on each of these. So I would make sure that we get that in time to apply that at this meeting. Yes.
Sam, do you feel like you've got enough clarity on the request from the body on that issue? I think Judge Menendez actually kind of asked for the legal opinion on that question. So. Okay.
Now, we were talking about Oh, sorry. Yes, Mr. Wallace, sorry.
I wasn't really asleep, but I'm trying to understand what law are we operating under currently? Is it the court's recent decision? Is it the original act, or what law right now is governing this body?
It's really a composite of two documents. The original charter amendment, as approved by the voters last November, as modified by the court, plus the ordinance that was enacted last week by the county commission, which largely puts most of what the court struck back in.
Right, the commission did that to accommodate, and that's great.
Right.
So the court's decision is the most recent legal guidance that we have to follow. Is that
Correct.
Okay.
July 7th or 8th. I don't have the document in front of me.
Thank you.
We were talking about calendar gates. Let me ask if this suggestion is one that would be acceptable. At the October meeting, we could listen and receive information, and then at a meeting sometime in December, we could take action. Is that something that would be acceptable to the committee and a way to kind of stretch this out a little bit so we don't have a 6-hour meeting?
What about November?
Or November. But I just, the two meetings is what I was really getting at. One where we receive the information in October, and then another meeting sometime in November or December where we actually take action. Is that okay? Yes.
I have a follow-up.
No, go ahead, Arthenia.
We don't have any idea of how many proposals we're going to get. And I was thinking that maybe we need to have 2 days set aside to hear the presentations. I was going to ask for some historical data, but as to how many one could, in the past, how many have come before to be approved. And it just seems to me that based on what Mr. Wong said and all the ones already, how can we and be informed enough to listen to all of this in one setting? And so I'm thinking one day 3 hours and another day 3, and if we finish early, we finish early. And I appreciate your concern, but let me tell you, those of us who have been in public service know that it takes a lot of time away from your personal life to be able to do this. But if you're going to be effective and do a good job, then you commit to taking the time that's necessary. And this is an important issue, and the public is really gung-ho about it because everywhere I go, it's something related to transportation. So I just want us to give it adequate time. And this is new. You know, I was on transportation in the legislature, but this is a whole nother game. And I just think that I'm going to need time to understand, as I assume some others may need.
Let me follow up on that, Senator Joyner. So you would ask for 2 days to receive the information and a day to make a decision, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Did you have a question, Mr. Fernandez?
Well, a comment, I guess. First, I associate myself with Athenia's comments. I absolutely agree. I would much rather see us overschedule than under,
right,
I guess is the point, and the point that both of you are making. I could easily see the October meeting turning into a session where mostly we are being inputted with information from the agencies, and we have very little time really other than in Q&A to get into the weeds. And November could be a time perhaps as a workshop even where we could go back through those and do what we need to do in terms of our own committee questions and answers, and maybe even ask members of the agencies to come back and supplement or answer additional questions, and then schedule a December meeting that would be for actual action and certification. And if we happen to get our job done early, as Arthenia says, and we can get it done in November, so be it, Thanksgiving and all that stuff. But at least we've allowed for it to happen. It's our first cycle, and we're going to need, I think, more time. This isn't going to be a rubber stamp. So that would be my request.
if what you're suggesting is an as-needed calendar, I don't know if that's allowed, but my impression right here is we're all feeling like we don't know. We don't know what to expect. It might take us less time than we expect. It might take significantly more. I, for one, I'm free to meet as many times as people wanted, but somebody said earlier that what we're doing right now is setting a precedent. And I think for that reason, we should be very methodical and cautious, and I suspect all of you feel the same way. And I did feel like at the last meeting, some of the discussions that were had felt a little bit on the fly. We're all still getting our bearings here, and so I think if we can schedule out a few dates and to the extent that we need them, make ourselves available, that would be what I would support.
Yes, Judge.
I would concur with Jay's comments. Also, before our next meeting, or hopefully maybe by the end of this week, could staff send us each a copy of two documents? One, the ordinance that was just passed, and two, the judge's order. I don't think we ever got a copy of that. If those are going to be the main document that's going to govern our existence, I think each of us would benefit by having a copy of it prior to, sufficiently before the next meeting so that we can at least digest that. And then again, if you have plans that are already ready for submission, if they can be provided electronically to us, we can maybe get a chance to look at those ahead of time. And if we come in with any questions, that might speed the process up somewhat. So I make those three requests.
So what I'm hearing is, at a minimum, we need to schedule 2 additional meetings. In addition to what you have here for the project plan review October meeting, another meeting for the plan review input, so to speak, and then another meeting, workshop or whatever, to take action. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think if needed, we may get everything done.
But I think we have to schedule it.
Yes.
I just want to, so I would ask, I don't know if you want to pull out, how do you want to handle the scheduling of that? What's the preference of the committee on scheduling this? Judge, I know you're a fan of Doodle, but
Love that
we, maybe, let's Doodle. Well, we have our calendars here. I guess, could we do it now if we pull out our calendars and just do it? Can we do that?
Doodle poll on the fly, I don't know if we have that capability. I'd like to make another suggestion, possibly, because one of my concerns would be that if we have a very long briefing with an agency rep presenting project plan from each of the governments, that will undoubtedly be a very long meeting. And at a follow-up meeting, if the only task for the committee is to approve, that could be a very short meeting. So I might suggest possibly we could work with agencies to have 2 project plans presented at the October meeting, and then a November meeting where you not only approve those project plans, but also receive project presentations from the other 3 agencies. So for example, we could have Plant City, Temple Terrace, and the City of Tampa present the plans to you in October, and then in November, you could certify them for compliance and also receive project plans from Hillsborough County and Hart. And then at a meeting in December, you could certify Hillsborough and Hart, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. We don't know what we don't know. And I'm trying to be conservative in this and make sure that, listen, I think we need a lot of input at this very next first meeting, and we're going to need a lot of briefing, and we need a lot of information from the agencies, more than we will probably need at any other meeting. And I want to make sure we have the ability to, and the comfort that we're all fine with taking that information. So I just want to be cognizant of that. And I think that's what I'm hearing from the committee, Ms. Kilpatrick and Mr. Fernandez.
Mr. Chair, I agree with Mr. Fernandez that I like the idea of the workshop in November. I like that idea.
And Johnny, and thank you. Johnny, I so appreciate the fact that you're trying to take care of our tender, sensitivities here, but I think all of us are hard workers. I would very much like to have as much information just downloaded on me next meeting as possible. If that means every agency is here, and it means we have, just speaking for myself, it means we got to go past date, so be it, so what? This has been going on a long time, and this is where the rubber meets the road. So let them come, let them download whatever they have, and then let us process and deal with it in November in a workshop setting. I'd hate to have anybody just sit back for 30 days and come back in November and, hit us with something that we have a lesser period of time to address. So that would be my reaction to your comment, is that probably isn't the better way to go, in my view.
Yes, Mr.
Since we all do not know how long each one of these presentations are going to be, we could maybe ask them timelines, rough timelines, but in that next meeting, we could just stay as late as we need to. I mean, instead of 2 hours, it could turn into 3.5 hours, okay? We'd have to take a break or something, and because it's all new to us, and it may be 2.5 hours. We don't know, but at least we'll get it behind us, and we'll know going forward.
In addition to that, one thing that I would like to see is if the agencies could explain to us why they think they comply, because we're ultimately not just determining whether people comply or whether the agencies comply, but how to determine whether the agencies comply. And I think if we have an explanation from them explaining why they think they comply, it would help us go about that.
If the committee likes, we could budget and ask you all to prepare for a 4-hour meeting. And if within that window you get the level of detail that you feel you need to certify the plans in a 3-hour time limit, then we get an hour off. If that helps, we could plan for a 4-hour meeting in October, November, and December.
What is the date of that 4-hour meeting?
Well, my suggestion would be to plan for 4 hours.
On this 28th?
October 28th, a date in November, and a date in December. That would give you enough time to host a proper workshop where you could really interact with the agency reps, ask any questions that you want, and I could coordinate with them ahead of time to prepare with some materials that might help illustrate the significance of the project.
I just want to make sure we're clear. So you would be asking for a 4-hour meeting on the 28th or so, and then an additional meeting scheduled in December? Is that what you're saying?
Well, if you'd like to over-allocate time, we could do a 4-hour meeting in November and then another one in December.
Okay, I think we're talking about 2 additional meetings, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think that's what I'm getting the sense the board would like to see, 2 extra meetings. If we don't need it, then fine.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I have a conflict on the 28th.
I was going to get to that.
If I can't be here that day, then then I think I will have missed so much until I would almost be ineffective.
You would never be ineffective, Senator. You're going to have to schedule these. You're going to have to figure out how to get us together for these other 2 meetings. Does anybody else have a problem with the 28th of October?
What about?
I'm pulling up my calendar here. I'm sorry.
29th.
I can't do the 29th.
Mr. Chair, can I suggest the 21st?
That would be fine with me. I don't know if any.
October the 21st, the prior Monday?
October 21st.
The prior
And
Monday?
if it is going to be a 4-hour meeting, could we possibly do 5?
Yeah, we'll try to
Instead of
start.
6?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be here till 10 either. Let's see.
Calendar.
How's the 21st for everybody first? Let's see if that works. That works for everybody? Okay, can we have the October meeting on the 21st?
Starting at,
And what, can we start it at 5?
5 to 9 p.m.?
Yes. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
and the 28th. Is that right?
No, we're moving the 28th to the 21st.
Okay.
And we're scheduling it from 9 to 5
5 to 9, right. And while we're here, let's just do this, because this is quicker than email and doodle, I guess. Let's set these other 2 meetings. It's just quicker, yeah. So we would want another meeting sometime
An early date.
in maybe early to mid-November, right?
The 11th is Veterans Day, I think, so.
Does it have to be on a Monday?
No.
Okay.
All right, so what about the 12th or the 13th or the 14th?
12th or 13th, all right with me.
Anybody object to the 12th or the 13th?
The 13th. I can't do the 13th.
Anybody object to the 12th?
I cannot do the 12th.
14th?
Of,
November?
I'm good.
We cannot do the 14th.
No.
I apologize. We were hosting a major event that night.
All right. What about the 18th?
That works for me.
I'm good.
November 18th work for everybody? See how quick that was? All right.
Hold on.
Uh-oh.
I won't be here that day. That's just one day I have to
Okay.
take off.
Same thing, 5 PM?
Yes, right?
Is that a definite, the 18th?
I'm waiting on Judge Menendez.
I mean, we can push it back in the week.
Okay.
Okay, November 18th is the November one.
Thank you. This is much simpler than
Huh?
Doodle.
It's okay.
You can?
Really long doodle.
You cannot? Okay.
Okay.
We can't
18th
do
is out.
Monday.
18th is out, okay.
19th.
All right. 18, 19.
20th.
I can't do any Tuesday.
20th, okay.
I can't do Wednesdays.
Tuesdays and Wednesdays are for hear more out. All right. Okay, we need it to be the 18th or the 21st then, whatever's got the least amount of conflicts. So does anybody object to the 21st?
That's good.
All right.
21st, okay.
All right, 21st is the meeting in November. Are we?
What time?
Sorry. That meeting can be 6. How long is that meeting going to be, or would we anticipate?
That's
Yeah,
the
my
workshop
suggestion
meeting.
was to
so-
prepare for 4,
Okay, 5 o'clock then.
and if we get out early,
Okay, 5 o'clock.
right, 5 to 9.
IOC, November 12th.
And a meeting in December, that needs to be, I would anticipate earlier in the month. All right, what about, no Tuesdays and Wednesdays, gotcha. What about the 9th or the 12th? Anyone have any objections to the 9th or the 12th?
12th?
No 12?
The 12th's good.
12 work?
9th's better for me.
Any other objections to the 9th or the 12th?
I'm sorry.
Night.
I can do 9.
Of
Okay,
November.
9th it is, 5 o'clock.
I'm not available.
12th, are you available?
12th, yes.
Who's not available on the 12th? Three or 4 members?
Really?
We're looking at the 12th?
I think we have 3 or 4
That's
people.
okay, go back to the 9th, I'll make it work.
Well, 12th is
We're
okay.
talking, this is December,
It's the
correct?
9th.
Okay,
Yeah,
just want to
December
make sure I was on the
9th.
right month. I'll make it work.
Okay, thank you. And I've been calling you Ms. Kilpatrick. I am very sorry. I will
That is
say that
okay.
on the record that I've been messing that up, rather than come to you after the meeting and whisper to you. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, so if
Yes.
I make sure I got them correctly. So our next meeting is the 21st of October. After that, if we need it, it's November 21st. And after that, if we need it, it's December 9th, all of them from 5 to 9.
Correct.
Okay.
That is my understanding. We will definitely need the December meeting, no matter what, right?
High likelihood, I would
Okay.
think.
If I understand correctly, the plan is to have a workshop-style meeting on October 21st with the agencies being invited to present their project plans to you, and we're preparing for a 4-hour meeting on the 21st of October, correct? And then on November 21st, to bring it before the committee for action, certifying compliance for each of the project plans, correct? So at minimum, we'll definitely need October and November to happen. December is possible.
And now you will have all the plans by the end of September, correct? So then you can get them to us
September
for
30th,
review.
we'll package and send out everything that we receive from the agencies to you all.
Committee okay with that plan going forward for the next 3 meetings at least?
Yes.
Good. I think that's good. Any objections, let me know now, or we'll move forward. All right.
You want to formalize it with a vote?
Oh, I'm sorry. I do need a motion to approve the calendar suggestions with the changes that we just adopted?
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. April moved. Do I have a second? Mr. Rolliser, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Objection, same sign. Thank you. All right, let's move to B, Citizen-Initiated Projects Review Process.
All right, Johnny Wong, MPO staff again. I won't have to say that anymore. IOC staff as well. So we listened to the feedback that we received from you all at the previous meeting. Some of you communicated in email your desire to see an electronic form made available on the website. So we presented a draft submission form for your approval. It is really only a few questions in simple language. We want to make this as available and accessible to members of the public as possible so that any citizen or resident of Hillsborough County can present a project and they don't necessarily have to have a huge transportation acumen. We want to make this something that your average citizen can participate in. So the first question is to ask them which of the following categories best describe the project that they're proposing, and we've listed off the project categories that appear in the governing law. Second question is asking them to provide the proposed location of the project. This will help us identify which agency would need to be forwarded this proposal so that they can follow up with the submitter and explore their options. And question 3 is asking them to explain why they believe that the project will yield benefits to the transportation system. And lastly, contact information. We also have some language at the bottom specifying that filling out the electronic submission form isn't mandatory to present projects. The alternative option for them to present projects to you all would be to attend the April public hearing, which is a mandatory hearing for you all, and they could leave a public comment basically providing the same information. We'll get their contact information at that meeting, and then we can connect them with the appropriate agency to take it from there.
I have 2 questions. One, if the citizen that makes this proposal is not present at the public hearing, what happens to their proposal?
We would, well, assuming that they get in contact with us to make it known that they have a proposal, we would ask that they either give us the information and we could fill out the contact or the submission form for them, or we direct them to the website so that they could fill it out themselves. We'll then package them and provide them to you in your agenda packet prior to that April public hearing so that you'll have some time to review ahead of time.
It is not a requirement that they personally present this to us at that public hearing, is what you're saying?
No. If they submit it only through electronic form that you see on the web or on the screen in front of you, we would not require that they attend that public hearing or the town hall meeting, as we called it on the calendar. Either or would suffice.
And we're accepting these on a rolling basis. I assume that anything that we take action on by or at that public hearing will be in time to be given to the other agencies for them to include in their respective plans.
Right. We're going to receive project plan or project proposals on a rolling basis. We're hoping to kind of use that April public hearing as a punctuation period so that we can collect everything that we've been provided over the previous calendar year, and then time that with agency budget processes so that if they want to move the project forward, they don't have any delay.
Okay. We have any questions from the committee?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Kilpatrick.
So what would our role be when it comes to reviewing those submissions? Are we approving them, just vetting them for common sense? What are we going to decide once we get them before they're sent forward to the respective agency?
There's no prescriptive language or standards in any of the governing law. So as a committee, that's really up to you. It's at the discretion how you'd like to handle it, but the idea, I think, would be for you to review the projects, and if you'd like to possibly take a vote or recommend to staff that you'd like us to connect the submitter to one of the agency representatives, we can handle it that way.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Did I hear the word certify in this process? That are we certifying these projects at all?
No, you're not certifying. You're reviewing project proposals, and I believe the language is to forward it to appropriate agency staff.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Just for clarity, the public ones coming in are what was just described. It's the ones from the agencies that we're going to be taking action on certifying.
Is there any, I guess, Ms. Kilpatrick said common sense, but is there any standard by which we approve or disapprove, or, I'm sorry, not forward or forward these proposals from the public? Is there any standard that we're operating under? Or?
Nothing in the governing law. Again, it's up to the IOC to decide if you all want to establish a policy wherein you will forward all of the proposals. That would be one option. If you want to create criteria and establish a standard, that's acceptable. But the feedback that I heard at the last meeting was that you want to keep it as simple as possible and not really get in the business of reviewing projects in a detailed manner.
Yes.
Okay, I think we have a lot of agencies that already do that. I would not want to see this agency become a duplicate of that. I mean, it does need to go to the jurisdictions for them to look at. If they did decide they wanted to move forward with the project, obviously something else would have to come out. We have a limited amount of money. So, I mean, I think that's really their decision to make, and then
So you're
to
good.
us for certification.
You're good with this process that's outlined
Yes.
here, right?
I agree with him.
Okay. Well, if there's no questions, I'm good with it. I just want to make sure that that's good. I guess, do you need a motion to approve this process?
That'd be great.
I would,
Make a motion that we approve this process and this form for public suggestions.
I'll second that.
thank you. That's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same. Thank you.
That was Ray Shermonte.
All right, let's move to item, category 6, item A, Transportation Projects Overview from start to finish. Ms. McKinley, MPO staff.
Right. Hi there. Good evening. Sarah McKinley, MPO staff. Tonight I'm sort of going to go through an overview of the life of a project, as well as how we developed our Imagine 2040 plan, sort of how we came to those buckets, and then what our possible next steps could be. This slide is depicting sort of a project's life from start to finish. We have our first phase, which is our planning phase. This is where we look at our comprehensive plans, our long-range transportation plans, and find out which projects to look at to sort of support the goals and objectives within those plans. These are largely longer-term plans, and then we also have the planning level studies. So this is probably the phases our staff could help lend support, especially when looking at some of those projects that are submitted by the citizens. The next phase is when we sort of look at programming and funding of those projects. So we look at whether or not it's monetarily feasible, and also if it's implementable. And then look at what is the cost for that, and sort of match it with eligible funding sources that we have available to us. We also, it's very important that you fund it based on a time frame, so including phases and fiscal years that are going to be needed to move that project through the entire lifeline. The third line there is what we call project development and environmental. It's really the design engineering phase. It's where we look at sort of what is going to be the project. We get into the construction plans. We also look at environmental impacts. There is a lot of stakeholder involvement as well as public involvement overall. And then we also get into identifying whether or not right-of-way is needed for a project. The fourth category there, again, is getting into that right-of-way. So whether or not there is land acquisition required, if with that will also be appraisals needed, if there's any relocation assistance, and then also demolition of any structures. These are could be as little as right-of-way needed for a sidewalk up to larger projects. Then we get into construction, just as what it is. It's overseeing each of those projects, making sure that they're constructed properly, as well as performing regular inspections throughout the project. And then maintenance. Maintenance is sort of the one that nobody really thinks of, but with every project that we move forward, there's also a maintenance agreement that there is going to be an agency or jurisdiction that will maintain that project. So that sidewalk, that bike lane, any sort of technology infrastructure that's included, that they will maintain that through the design life of the project.
We've got a question, Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you. Sarah, please mark your spot. I know you're in the zone. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to connect dots here. Is the message you're delivering to us that this is the project development process that each of these funded agencies would be going through before they deliver a package to us, say, for example, next month, that Plant City would have done all this? Or Temple Terrace would have done all this? Who's doing this, and how does it affect our work?
So pretty much this is a summary of any transportation project through its lifeline. They all started a planning process somewhere. They move into programming, when is it going to be funded, and then you design the project, get it ready for construction. If you need that right of way, you also acquire that. Then you get into the construction, and then you have your maintenance agreement. So any project, even the transportation alternatives projects that we bring in through the TIP priority process, which I was going to speak a little bit on the next slide, sort of each of those transportation projects we get goes through this lifeline. You don't just pick a project and construct it. It has to go through each of these steps. So it's sort of just an overview to get you familiar with when you start seeing projects come in. Some of the projects, the city of Tampa might have already done design in-house, so they might have it programmed for a construction phase. So just so that you know, this is sort of the overview of what each transportation project goes through. And then when you start seeing those plans and you see those phases identified, know that that project started off here and is somewhere in this process. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Just to follow on that,
Yeah.
so when a project comes to us for funding, it could be really anywhere in there, or I guess anywhere before construction.
Correct. Yes. All right, this is sort of an overview of, as MPO staff, the plans that we work with. We have, first of all, our long-range transportation plan. This is sort of our 20-year outlook. It identifies sort of our program-based projects as well as our major projects.
What does MPO stand for?
Sorry, Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Okay.
Sorry. From that larger plan, we update this every 5 years. We're in the midst of updating our plan. Johnny's going to go through the 2045 needs assessment and sort of where we are with that. I'm just doing a high overview of how we developed our 2045 long-range transportation plan. So from that 20-year plan, we sort of funnel it down, and we have our Florida Department of Transportation work program, as well as our MPO priority project process. This is sort of an annual process we work through cyclically, and starting about this time, we actually just got our program highlights from the work program today. So starting this time every year, we start looking at what projects are proposed to be funded within this work program. We're also in the midst, in the new calendar year, we'll be updating our priority projects. So our priority projects are updated every year as well. So these sort of funnel into each other. While that is going on, each of the local governments are reviewing and updating their local capital improvement programs. And so that's largely the projects that they have set today. So this was sort of our current funding that was mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. So those set projects. Now, in addition to that, they're creating these new project plans. So these are continually to be updated every year. And then from that, it funnels into what's called our Transportation Improvement Program. And this is our 5-year work program that looks at the comprehensive list of all the projects and all of their phases over the next 5 years. And the projects from this committee will be worked into that so that we're not only showing the FDOT work program and the local projects for the capital improvement programs, as well as the projects that are certified through this plan. So this is sort of an overview of our prioritization process that we came up with for the Imagine 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan. This was the first time that we moved our LRTP into sort of performance-based planning. Those first 4 programs up there are tied to sort of the buckets that we all refer to. We have our preserving the system. This is maintaining our transit state of good repair, as well as making sure our bridges are in good repair, and our resurfacing projects. We then have our reducing crashes and vulnerability. This looks at total crashes, bike ped crashes, as well as the vulnerability that we are to any major storms. Our next category is the minimizing traffic for drivers and shippers. This sort of is looking at technology to help relieve congestion, as well as increasing reliability in the network while decreasing delay or travel time overall in the network. We then have our real choices when not driving. This is looking at expanding our bus service as well as our trail system. So here we're looking at sort of a density rating of population and job density, trying to increase accessibility within the network, especially for those that don't have a car or have access to a car. And then our last program there is our major capacity for economic growth. These are the capacity projects looking at new through lanes, as well as major interchange, and also fixed guideway transit. And so this is looking at overall congestion in the network and how to relieve that.
Excuse me, so you're saying that that was a priority list, meaning I should interpret that to be major capacity projects as the lowest priority?
Yeah, I was going to get into that next slide.
I'm sorry.
So how did we come up with how those are organized? Because yes, that is the sort of queuing that we use when looking at our project prioritization. So this sort of breaks down the percentages of what we heard out of our Imagine 2040 Part 2 public outreach. And of this, the preserving the system overall had the lowest sort of low ranges for funding. We asked basically, would you fund each of these categories at high, medium, or low? And then took those percentages from the public outreach we got and sort of helped us organize those into the order they're in. So as you can see, preserving the system was at 16% low and the rest high and medium. So that sort of became the first criteria we look at to making sure that we can not only have our system up to date overall, but filling in the backlog that existed. Reducing crashes became the next category. Again, this is looking at all of our safety projects as well as our vulnerable to storm facilities. And when Johnny goes through the 2040, there will be a little change where we've decided to move vulnerability into the preserving the system, but you'll see that as part of his presentation. Our next group was the minimizing traffic for drivers and shippers. This is our using technology, so signalization improvements, ramp metering, sort of looking at how we can integrate technology into our network to sort of help. It's more of like thinking smaller cost, bigger bang for your buck kind of projects, rather than just relying on high costing capacity projects. And then the final program there, it was sort of split 3 ways over between the high, medium, and low, and that became our real choices when not driving category. So as far as what you get with these categories, again, we were able to take the funding revenues or forecasts from that 2040 plan and look at the percentages that people wanted to fund each of those programs and sort of apply these high and medium funding levels to them. So preserving the system, we're looking at bringing our resurfacing down to an average age of 17 years, as well as bringing our bus fleet back to age. We're looking at reducing crashes from 21 to 50% with this, as well as preserving our major roads in a major storm. This was looking at sort of a medium to medium high level funding for the reducing crashes. And then the last two buckets we were able to spend or fund at those high percentage levels, looking at 17% improvement to our intersections and 10% decrease in delay. And then funding our trails network, as well as increasing our frequent bus service to 46% of the population and jobs.
Mr. Fletcher.
Can you go back to, yeah. What do these criteria have to do with our mandate and our review criteria?
That's my question.
I'm getting there how, based on our plan and based on what we're looking at for the FDOT work program and how that the buckets that you look at do apply to what we've been doing in our plans, and then Johnny's going to get into the allocations more as part of his presentation. So,
I think they apply. I just think they're in a different order. As I read the charter, we have a different priority than this is listed in. That's.
And what levels mean?
That refers back to the low, medium, and high. So 3 being high, 2 being medium, and 1 being low.
I had the same question as Mr. Fletcher, and I'm not sure I still have an answer to it, to be honest. But
So you're talking about prioritizing.
Yes.
Ours, at least the way I'm looking at it, and I guess it's an important topic for discussion, our role is more of kind of yes, no. It's kind of binary. Are they within the limits, or are they not within the limits of the standard?
Well, this is how we've worked in the past with the local jurisdictions on prioritizing additional funds that we're able to prioritize through the work program. So we're just doing an overview of what was done before, and then Johnny's going to go through his presentation.
One of the things to take away from Sarah's presentation might be understanding why certain projects would be selected to be included in the project plans. So Sarah and I are both MPO staff, and what we look at is not any set of projects that are specific to one of the cities or only the county or only Hart. We look at all the projects across all agencies across the county, and we try to evaluate what the benefits would be countywide. So we're able to look at a project and say, this is a good project because it costs this amount of money, it has this amount of benefits, and they accrue to this group of people. So that's kind of the role that we play in helping prioritize all of these projects.
All right, let me see. This is just an example of how we do that prioritization. As you can see, we get projects from the county, from the city, from FDOT, and we look at sort of how they would benefit the network and then rank them based on this. This is a list of what we were able to get funded in this last year. So you can see the phases are listed there as well. So looking at design and construction phases for these projects. So again, they don't always come to us at the very beginning stages, and then we work with the Department of Transportation to get these funded.
are we making decisions on projects on how they interact with other agencies? So when the city of Tampa comes before us with a project, are we supposed to be taking into account how a project from Hart may interact with that?
I don't believe that is part of the specific certification process, but I believe there's
that's
a
their
discussion
job.
to be had with those as well. This is just again, just to show you how our plans sort of fit in, our program buckets, and sort of the breakdown of what the department has funded over the last year. And then we also look at our local agencies. And so as you can see, these align with sort of those programs that you'll be looking at as well, and that it all sort of does align together and fit in with what we've been doing and what you've been tasked to do as well. Again, this is an initial slide just to show you sort of overview again. A lot of the projects you'll probably start seeing at this design and engineering level and then moving forward. Like I said at the beginning, as staff, we are able to help with that planning process as well. So any of those citizen initiatives that you get in, if the jurisdictions wish for us to help, we can provide that initial looking at the planning phases, the feasibility of a project, can it actually be implemented as well. So with any of that, if you have any additional questions, please let me know.
Yes.
It's more of a comment. I think what you're doing is you're taking all the funding from the many different places and you're putting these projects in some kind of priority. We're just doing one part of this, which is from the sales tax, and I think we need to remember that as we go through this.
Right. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
I have a
Oh,
question.
sorry.
So how is it going to be determined what projects qualify for the 1% funding versus projects that would fall under an agency's normal budget process?
I think that's sort of the legal standing that you asked for earlier, but the agencies, when they present those plans, they are supposed to show which sort of program it falls under, as well as which phase they're asking to be funded. So that's why we wanted to do an overview so that you guys are aware of that it's not just, here's a project, we want construction. You're going to probably need to get familiar with those phases of a transportation project as well. So that was sort of why we wanted to give you an overview of that as well.
Mr. Fletcher and then Mr. Fernandez.
I think part of the question, though, was about the 1% that's earmarked for, I guess, planning by the MPO. So I hadn't thought about that till just now when she said that, but I don't know how that money's getting programmed. That's a good, interesting question.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question. I was probably going to ask it of Dr. Wong. There's a 1% administrative fee, so to speak, that the MPO gets, and I was going to ask kind of how that was going to be spent and what the process was and all that sort of stuff. I guess now is the appropriate time to ask that question.
Hi again,
Out of you.
Beth Alden, MPO Director. So great question. The language in Article 11 does not specify a review process for that by this committee. What we have offered to do is to provide a public review process. The MPO has a public document for its planning budget. All MPOs do, it's federally required, because we're actually using federal grants to support transportation planning for all of the local governments here. And so the planning tasks and activities and deliverables are all laid out in this planning work program, which is reviewed by all of the MPO advisory committees and then ultimately approved by the MPO board. So what we have done is to integrate that 1% of the sales tax funds into the MPO planning work program and use that existing process for review of how those funds would be used. Now, all that being said, we're happy to come and talk with you about how we would anticipate using those planning dollars, and it may be that you all hear from members of the public about ideas that you think are interesting and that you would like to ask us to look into, and we'd be very open to that.
Let me ask a hypothetical question. I'm going to use HART because that's just the example I'm looking at right now. So I'm looking at the charter, and it says that HART has to do certain things and feasibility studies and all this stuff that I'm not a transportation expert. When HART comes before us and makes this presentation, am I to just take them for their word that all this has been done, all this has been met, they've done all this analysis, and am I to just say, well, HART says it's good by the charter, so it's good by the charter, you're certified?
And then there'll be an audit right? To
Right.
make sure that they've done that.
Right. Right. So a year later, there would be an analysis of whether Hart had been able to deliver on that presentation that they made.
What assists me in my decision-making process at the time when Hart comes before this board committee and says, this is our project plan, it meets all the criteria we believe of the charter? What assists me in my ability to, quote, I guess, verify what Hart's telling me?
Well, I think you probably want to talk with your counsel about what your action is.
Well, I'm not suggesting they're lying. I'm asking for our ability to independently analyze what comes to us rather than we're listening to the agency tell us what they want. Everybody's coming here because they want a piece of the money. How do we independently analyze what information we're getting? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I don't, just friendly advice on this one. There's what you legally have the authority to do, and then there's what you, as a group of volunteers who are putting a lot of time into this on behalf of the citizens of Hillsborough County, what you can do just as sort of your bully pulpit, essentially. So there's an action that you will take that looks at legally what are your powers under Article 11. But for example, if you wanted to ask any agency staff to consider issues that have come to your attention, that's within your purview to do, I think. Maybe Sam could correct me, but.
Okay, I'm not picking on Hart. I was saying it in context of the charter. Yes, Mr. Hunter.
My understanding, if we receive the projects from Hart among one of the other four governments, Hart and the four governments, that's certified by Hart. It's already been certified. Now, if we want, from the question you asked, it to be reevaluated as to whether they're meeting the requirements of the law, we can ask the clerk's office and/or the county attorney's office to look at it. But it first has to go through, in my opinion, the certification by that agency before it comes to us. We can always challenge it, but it has to be certified by them before it comes to us.
Right, I understand that.
Okay.
It was a hypothetical, perhaps inartfully worded. Yes.
If you want to go first.
Sorry,
I wanna ask
who was
again
next?
about the 1%.
No, go ahead, Jay. Do your thing.
I'm very interested. I hadn't thought of it until the question was brought up, but regarding the 1% and how the MPO will spend the money, your response is interesting to me, and correct me if I misunderstand, but the MPO is a planning organization that helps the agencies in their planning, who then fund the individual projects. And how the MPO plans to use the 1% is essentially to continue doing as they currently do, not earmarking that 1% specifically for projects that will be in proposals that the agencies bring to us, but to simply help them or help fund the general work with the agencies, knowing that some of that will then go to the sales tax projects. Is that correct?
So there are a number of overhead tasks that you might or might not be thinking about. So there's support for this committee, for example, and paying for HTV and the clerk and that kind of thing. There would also potentially, and I was hoping to talk with you all about this at a future meeting, be public information materials produced about the agency project plans and what benefit those would have for our community. We would probably want to have some support to produce materials. Maybe they're online, maybe they're printed publications. You're required in Article 11 to produce an annual report that would be published in the newspapers and distributed in all of the public libraries. Presumably, you would want that laid out in a user-friendly kind of a way, something that people would find engaging and informative. So that's going to take a little bit of attention. And there might be other types of public information that you might want to produce. Another thing that we're tasked with is data analysis in support of the implementing agencies. So we are intending to build a data sharing platform that would aggregate data and all of the agencies would have access to it and then be able to look at things like what are the existing crash rates at particular locations, what is the existing transportation bottlenecks, using the latest available real-time data, and create forecasting tools so that you could see what the benefit of those things would be. I'm getting a lot into the weeds here. I was actually hoping to talk about this with you at a future meeting, but.
So the distinction that I was trying to get at, and all that was great, the distinction that I was trying to get at is whether we're talking about trickle-down funding, the 1% starting at the top and ultimately some of it working its way into things that are specific to what we're doing here, or whether it would be directly allocated for these sorts of projects. Because the MPO will assist in the planning of projects that are not within what could be funded by all for transportation, for instance, lane widening and so forth. So I'm just wondering if it's allocated specifically for the work that will be brought under the sales tax project proposal, or whether it's just generally allocated.
It's to assist, there's language in Article 11 that says that this work is to assist the implementing agencies to implement this article.
Okay.
Mr. Wallace.
Is the MPO audited every year?
Yes.
Is it audited, is it part of a component, is it a component unit, or is it audited independently by itself?
I'm not a financial professional.
Okay. But there is an audit that the MPO goes through every year. Okay. Thank you.
Judge, and then Mr. Fernandez.
To show my ignorance, I would like to, I'm just going to, how is the MPO currently funded? What's the source of its funds?
Federal transportation grants for planning.
That's it?
That's it.
Just federal grants?
We have a little bit of a state grant, yes.
Okay, nothing from the county government, no budgetary portion comes from Hillsborough County or any of the other agencies?
Hillsborough County provides a lot of in-kind support. So, for example, they provide us with space in this office building.
But no direct funding to buy envelopes or anything of that nature?
There is also a 10% match for one of the grants.
Okay, so you get a state grant and the county matches that, and then you get some federal grants. So this 1% would be obviously in addition to any grant money you're getting or anything.
That's correct.
Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Two things, real quick. First of all, I just want to be clear in my head. I'm envisioning the pie with all the slivers cut out of it, the 45%, the 50-some-odd% and all of that. There's that one little sliver of 1% that was to go to the MPO. That's the 1% that we've been talking about, not the 1% sales tax, but the 1% of the 100% of the sales tax. And that 1% is the thing that's supposed to be dedicated to the MPO to provide administrative support for, among other things, what we do here.
Right, support
That's right.
for the IOC and assisting the implementing agencies.
And probably to help Mr. Hamilton with his handsomely fees and those kinds of things. There are expenses related to all this, and that's what that 1% is supposed to be for, right? Yeah, okay. That's not about highway widening, that's about administrative costs. Okay. The other question I had, and this is by no means a negative to you, Sarah. You did your usual stellar job, and thank you. But I just want to be clear. At the end of the meeting last month, it's the last line of our minutes that we approved here. I think it's the last line. Yeah. It says, Attorney Fernandez suggested the IOC run through an abbreviated project presentation at the next meeting. When I was reading the agenda, for some odd reason, I thought that, what you just did, was going to do this, what I asked for last month. So is this coming from you, Dr. Wong? You're going to be doing an abbreviated project presentation for us?
My next presentation will end with that, an opportunity to kind of review the process of receiving the plans and going over what you might see in the project plans.
Next month?
No, at the end of this meeting today.
You're going to do that now, but that's to be basically like a mock trial, if you will, for what we're going to see for real next month. And that's what you're going to do next. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. All right.
Mr. Fletcher?
No, I'm good. The point is,
Okay.
this 1% isn't to build anything. It's planning and support. So,
We don't implement projects as an NGO staff.
Okay. Thank you. Are we moving on to the next presentation?
Unless there's any more questions.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, okay. We will move on to B, MPO 2045 Needs Assessment and Practice Certification Review for Compliance.
Thanks for having me back. All right, so I think you all understand that by now our goal for this meeting is to bring you up to speed and make you transportation experts in 2 hours. We've only got about 15 minutes left, so I hope I cover everything that you need. I'm going to brief you on an assessment that the MPO produces every 5 years. And I'm also going to cover a little bit of background information that I think might be helpful to you to understand why those formulas in the ordinance are so important and where they originate from. So as the staff attorney mentioned earlier, Sam mentioned that last week the BOCC adopted an ordinance which reinstated the allocation formulas that were originally part of the charter language, but which were struck by the trial court. No one has really asked that question yet, but it is an important question to ask, is where those formulas come from, or where that formula comes from, and what the significance of it is. The first thing to note is that not all of the agencies receiving a portion of these funds are bound by the allocation formula. HART has a formula that it has to allocate certain money, or has a formula that it has to abide by and allocate a percentage of its revenue towards certain projects. The municipal agencies, City of Tampa and Hillsborough County, because they receive more than 5% of the surtax revenue each year, they also have to abide by the formula. The population in the cities of Temple Terrace and Plant City and the MPO, because we have special section dedicated to us in the charter language, we don't have to abide by these allocation formula. But I will say that in the project plans that I have seen, at least Temple Terrace, they tried to mimic the allocation formula that you're going to see now. So this presentation and this whole meeting actually have been fairly MPO heavy, but the story of where that allocation formula comes from begins with the MPO. I apologize that it's really small, but you're looking at graphics that were produced in 2014. So in 2014, we completed the 2040 long-range plan needs assessment. We looked at how much money was being spent by all of the agencies in Hillsborough County on transportation projects and what those funds were being used for. The revenue sources and the amount of funding are shown in the bar chart on the far right in blue, and the transportation project categories that those revenues fund are on the left. The categories colored in light orange indicate that that project category is receiving a very low level of funding, level 1, as Sarah explained. That means that the performance for each one of those project categories is not very high. The two that you can hardly see on that bar chart are colored in light green. Those are funded at level 2. That means that performance is slightly better than orange, but not good enough to meet public expectations. And the one in dark green means that it's performing fairly well. So bridges in this county were funded fairly well for maintenance, no safety risks. They may be obsolete from a design perspective, but they're actually meeting expectations. Again, most of the programs being funded are at a level 1. 2 of them were at level 2, and 1 was at level 3. Okay, so that was a chart showing you what the performance was at the 2014 level of funding. In 2014, we also conducted a pretty large public survey, and we asked residents of Hillsborough County what level of performance in each of those categories do they want? Not what they have, but what do they want? And we also showed them how much it would cost to achieve that level of performance in each one of these categories. And overwhelmingly, they told us that they wanted a very high level of performance and that they were willing to pay for it. And as we've seen recently, the voters, passed the surtax. With that level of funding, we could raise the performance in each one of these project categories almost to the top tier. All right, so we determined for the public how much money it would cost to bring each of those project categories up to a high level of performance. And you can see what the cost breakdown would be by transit expenditures, non-transit, and in our 2040 plan, we left 8% of that budget unallocated. The formula that appeared in the original charter language very closely mimics the pie chart that we produced on the right. So the pie chart that appears in the charter language is shown on the left, and in that charter language and now in the county ordinance, they're allocating 54% of all the surtax revenue to the county and municipalities so that they can fund non-transit projects. 45% goes to HART for those transit projects, and 1% is coming to the MPO.
Jay. How do you define transit?
Transit is modes that's using, there's two kinds of transit that are listed explicitly in this section of the charter language and the ordinance. One would be expansion of bus service. So this could fund things like circulator. I'm not a transit expert. I can't think of all the kinds, but funding existing buses like what you would catch if you hopped out at a bus stop right now. Another portion of those transit expenditures would fund fixed guideway rail, so things like the streetcar, light rail, if that happens to come sometime in the future. Does that answer your question?
Non-automobile transit.
It's all non-automobile, not non-automobile. I mean, a bus is an automobile, but.
Fair enough.
Right. Sorry, I almost confused myself. All right, does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, so these two pie charts show the non-transit allocations. The right is what our MPO 2040 plan allocated, and on the left is the allocation formula that appears in the charter language. You can see that they really closely mimic one another. That funding is broken down across 5 project categories. Sarah already covered them, but I'll just say it once again. These 5 categories are maintenance and vulnerability reduction, congestion reduction, safety improvements, network improvements, and then a % of the funds left over can fund any transportation project allowed by law or governing law. And lastly, Jay, to just touch on what we just covered, the transit allocation, once again, in the charter language very closely matches our 2040 plan.
Johnny?
Yes.
Could you go back? I'm sorry, Chair. No. May I? I apologize. These two pie charts, this isn't a function of serendipity, right? I mean, the folks that came up with the AFT language looked at what you all had done and came up with something that came close to mirroring it. Is that not fair?
I believe so.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
All right, so this second section, since we've already covered where those allocation formula come from and what the significance of them are, we wanted to show you what condition the transportation system is in today. So the last time this assessment was done was 2014, and we projected what the benefits would be at 2014 levels of spending. We just did the same assessment very recently, so this information is fresh and hot off the presses, and we'd like to share with you what the impacts would be, not only of the funding that's currently available, but what kind of result you all can expect from budgeting these projects over the next 20 years that are funded with the surtax revenue. All right, so I won't belabor it. Sarah already covered what our program categories are. The first program category is state of good repair and resiliency. Once again, this looks at maintaining assets like pavement, bridges, transit assets like buses and other vehicles, and vulnerability reduction like stormwater improvements. At the current level of funding, that is the amount of money that's being spent across Hillsborough County today without the surtax, if that funding were to continue over the next 20 years, we'd have a serious deficiency. For pavement condition, if the trend that we see today holds over the next 20 years, 60% of our major roads would be resurfaced on schedule, only 60%. The typical road in Hillsborough County would be resurfaced only once every 28 years, and our standard of good repair, it is like repaving a road so that it's not filled with potholes and damaging your tires and wheels when you drive over it, is 17 years, right? So if the funding trend holds, we'll be 11 years over the appropriate time to resurface a road. However, with the sales tax plus existing spending, all of the roads in Hillsborough County will be meeting the standard, and they'll be resurfaced once every 17 years at least.
Yes.
This could be a loaded question, but looking at that red, we're talking about resurfacing roads, not building new roads.
Correct.
And that's the standard that we're going to be judging projects on.
We're not exactly proposing a standard for you to judge projects. I think that the information that you should take away from here is the importance of maintaining the existing level of spending and then supplementing that with the sales tax revenue, right? So we know, we've done surveys and we know what the public demands in the way of performance. And the only way for us to get there is to maintain the amount of money that's being spent and then use the surtax to complement or supplement that amount.
I guess I'm leading to adding additional lanes for new growth.
That's not included in this category. That's part of the major projects category, and we have a totally separate process.
Wanted you to say.
Yeah. All right, thanks. So the second element in the state of good repair project category is maintaining bridge assets. We looked at how much money is being spent in 2019, and if that funding trend holds, we'd be able to do continued routine maintenance on an annual basis so that we can maintain the safety and usability of bridges. We could also afford one major rehab or replacement. So this is like if a bridge needs structural work, the current funding would allow for one major rehab a year and one minor rehab. With the trend plus sales tax, we could, again, continue performing that routine maintenance, but we could address the backlog of bridge deficiencies by doing 3 major rehabs a year and 11 minor. For transit assets, again, if we have the current level of funding, that would result in a significant shortfall, and that would prevent HART from replacing its buses every 12 years, which is its standard. If that funding trend holds over 20 years, it will have a fleet of 202 buses, and 10% of them will be older than 12 years. At that age, we would expect almost 2,100 road calls per year, or 8 road calls each weekday. That means 8 times each weekday, a bus is broken down and is requiring some maintenance. So people are not able to get to their job on time because the bus suffered some engine malfunction. With the sales tax, HART could expand its fleet from 202 to 283, and 100% of the buses would be replaced on time, and we'd have about half as many road calls. The third element is resiliency to major storms. These are those vulnerability projects. What they mean in real life is stormwater improvements, so drainage, retention ponds, treatments that prevent roads from getting flooded and preventing people from getting to where they need to be. We did a tri-county study recently with Pasco and Pinellas counties, and we found that 20% of all the roads in the county are vulnerable to either a Category 3 storm or sea level rise, high sea level rise, and 11% of the network is vulnerable to a flood event, something that would drop like 18 inches of rain in a couple hours. So that's pretty significant. With the current amount of funding, The current amount of funding that's available really only allows the governments to invest in drainage improvements. But with the amount of sales tax money that's coming in, you could do higher order of magnitude projects, things that make a more significant impact, like raising the profile of the road. So if a road is, at or below sea level, you could raise it up so that it's not flooded as often. You could do wave attenuation, like preventing waves from coming up over major roads if it's like a windy day, those kind of things. I'm not an expert on vulnerability, so I apologize for not being able to give you more details. Vision Zero is a program that we created to reduce crashes, especially fatal and serious injury crashes, which are a real problem in our county. I also want to draw your attention to the State of the System report that we included in your packet. That report is something that we do every 2 years, and you can see crash trends over the past decade or so. Over the past 10 years, we have at certain times led the nation in fatalities. So this county was number one, i.e. the worst county to be a pedestrian or to suffer fatal injuries. Over the past 5 years, the county has averaged almost 170 fatalities each year and 1,600 serious injuries. With the current level of funding, although it has increased over the past 5 years, we would only be able to reduce crashes by 15%. So that is positive. We're able to treat about 130 miles of road with complete streets treatments. But with the trend plus the additional sales tax, we could jump that 15% reduction up to about 35% reduction. And that's all crashes across all modes, bike, pedestrian, vehicle to vehicle. That'd be 35% fewer fatalities and serious injuries each year. What that means in the way of projects that you might see in a project plan is that we could, over the next 20 years, do complete streets treatments on 500 miles, on 350 miles of the worst crash corridors in the county. So you could tackle that problem by addressing the worst roads. We could fill in sidewalks and build sidewalks where they currently don't exist on 1,400 miles of road. And we could put streetlights on 500 miles of currently unlit roads in the county. Smart cities, let me define that for you a little bit. So when we're talking about a road that has a significant traffic problem, one of the ways that you could alleviate that problem is by putting in a new lane. And of course, we know for a time that will address congestion because people will have a new lane to drive in. Another way to address it is with technological and operational improvements. And that second category is really what Smart Cities focuses on. It's about attempting to alleviate congestion without widening roads, which are really quite an expensive treatment. We modeled congestion on all of our major roads in the county, and we projected that if nothing is done by the year 2045, delay or time spent in your car would increase almost 3 times. So if you're stuck in your car for 20 minutes each day, by 2045, that could become an hour. If we continue to invest the amount of money that's currently being spent, we could reduce delay by 40% on 110 miles of major roads. But if we bump that spending up to trend plus the sales tax revenue, we'd see that same reduction on more than 190 miles of major roads, and you'd see a 30% improvement in your average commute time. What this means in the way of project plans that you might see are that a lot of the treatments that could be funded with the surtax are closed-circuit TV so that the traffic engineers can monitor problems as they're happening on roads in real time. You might see intersection improvements that help facilitate better flow so that vehicles aren't stopping unnecessarily and aren't making prohibited turning movements. There's technology that you can put on buses that allow them to hold the green light so that they don't have to stop at a red and then back up traffic behind them. There's also loop detectors that can detect in real time how much traffic is on a road so that the traffic engineers can change the signaling patterns to let the cars move freely. All right, the last program category is trails and side paths. This is also referred to as network improvements in the charter language. If current funding holds at $2 million per year, by the year 2045, 600,000 people in this county will be served by a trail and a side path that allows them to connect to their grocery stores, schools, place of work, within a quarter mile of their home. So that's what we would refer to as good access. We could build 50 new miles of trails and side paths, including finishing some projects like the Upper Tampa Bay Trail, Bypass Canal, Green Artery, and a few others. With the current spending plus the sales tax, we could provide access to more than 1 million people, which will be about half of the county in 2045. And we could triple the amount of miles of trails and side paths and basically build out the entire trail network. We could also use a portion of that money to invest in better transit service. So this would be that transit restricted portion that funds expanding bus service or investing in alternative transit modes. At the current trend, about 300 miles of roads would have frequent service or better, and about 1/3 of the county's population and jobs would have great service. But with the surtax revenue, that number jumps up by about 500 miles. So about 800 miles of roads in total would have frequent service or better, and half the population would have great service. All right, so with all that background information, and I apologize, I know that I'm a little long in the tooth anyway. I want to move as quickly as possible, but also give you an opportunity to kind of get acclimated to what you might see in these project plans. So this is the last section. It was difficult to schedule an agency representative to come and present the project plans, so we had to select some draft. They're not necessarily fake projects. You will see a lot of projects in the plans that very closely mimic what you'll see on the screen in a moment, but these are draft plans, and we also have some suggestions for how you might go about certifying compliance with the governing law. So this is a sample of what you might be presented with, a very small portion. The project plan that I looked at today was City of Tampa's, and it was many times the length of these 5 projects that I've included. However, on the far left-hand side of the screen, and this is a template that the City of Tampa provided, on the far left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the name of the project, including the road or the trail or the bridge that's receiving a portion of the revenue. And if it happens to be a network improvement or a safety improvement, you'll see A and B points. So you'll see where the project begins and where it ends. Under the description, you might see some language borrowed from a transportation plan or a comprehensive plan describing what kind of treatments you might see with this project. So if you look at the very first project that I have labeled A Street from A Ave to B Ave, it falls under the category of complete streets and safety improvements. So you know that this is a project that they're trying to fund with or under the project category called transportation safety improvements. The description has a fairly long list of what you might see in that project. It could include roadway improvements to enhance safety, multimodal connectivity. There could be roundabouts, sidewalks, bike facilities, crosswalks, or other safety measures. The way that this particular agency had the funding broken down was with about 1/4 of the funds falling under the maintenance and vulnerability section. And I believe that's because of that line in the description saying roadway improvement. To me, and you know I'm not speaking for an agency or anything, to me that means that they're probably going to do some sort of resurfacing. Since they're going to be laying down safety improvements, it makes sense that they would also try to repair the pavement at the same time.
When you have, I understand the maintenance, what's the vulnerability?
The actual project category title is maintenance and vulnerability. I think it could be an either or type situation.
But what is vulnerability?
Those would be the stormwater improvements, drainage improvements, anything that reduces our vulnerability to storms or
I mean, the charter
flooding.
says reduce congestion and transportation vulnerabilities.
Right,
And that's flooding, as I understand it.
right, correct. All right, some of the other projects in here that might be funded with a different project category is the second one, B Street traffic signal upgrades. I take it to mean that there are existing traffic signals out there. They may be legacy, AKA old, and they'd like to replace those old traffic signals with ones that can be controlled by the engineers to improve traffic flow. And if that happens to be the case, I believe that that may fit into the congestion reduction program category because that would facilitate traffic flow and reduce congestion. I picked a few others. The second project from the bottom, citywide bike trail. So the project description was to convert existing lanes that are for the purpose of vehicles into a buffered bike trail in an urban corridor for cyclists and pedestrians to use. And if that happens to be the case, that might qualify as a network improvement, which is designed to facilitate bike and ped travel. All right, so one of the steps for certifying compliance could be looking at, are the projects in the project plan categorized correctly? And by that, I mean, are the benefits that the agency predicts from the project falling into the right category? So just quickly reviewing, it seems that they all may fit because the first project could be a maintenance project if they're laying down new pavement, and it could be a safety project if they're doing roundabouts, sidewalks, bike facilities, that kind of thing. The traffic signals, again, may qualify for congestion reduction, and just a spot check for citywide bike trail, that sounds like a network improvement. So that could be a first step for you all to review. The second step.
That goes to the question that I asked. If they say it does, then it does. Is that the point?
That's tough. I don't know if I would put it so bluntly, but by the time you receive the project plans, they will have already been certified by a professional engineer or a procured specialist who can certify that, yes, the project is meeting the intended purpose or will meet the intended purpose. And also, it will have been reviewed by the governing body. So there are 2 checks at least before it makes its way to you.
Okay. Judge.
Yeah, on this chart here, do the agencies make any analysis before presenting something to us wherein, let's say, one of the categories, those numbers are how much they're spending, correct?
Yes, those are.
The 1,800 on the very top, the first project for safety improvements, 1,800. That's how much they're gonna spend for that, maintenance and mobility, another 4. So that's where they get the 2.2 million.
Yes.
Okay, so they do it that way. All right, so when you talk about network improvements, what is that? What is a network improvement? Give me an example.
Those are projects to improve bike and pedestrian mobility. So that could be a new sidewalk, it could be a new bike trail, it could be a multi-use trail. There's some language in the county charter that provides some examples of what kind of project could actually be funded in that category, but those are just some examples.
Okay, and if the agency make an analysis if this is a positive for one of the categories, but it could end up being a negative for another category. So you improve the network here with closing down 3 lanes, but you're increasing congestion at the same time. Do we get any type of information as to what they considered in making those determinations, or not, just that,
Judge, can you speak into the microphone? when you're asking your
Only
question.
if I turn around.
I'm getting asked to ask you to do that.
So I think to restate the question, Judge Menendez asked if, for example, there could be one project that has positive benefits in one project category, but that corresponds to a negative benefit in another project category.
And do we get that information given to us?
I can't speak for the
not,
agency representatives, and I'm not entirely certain how that fits into the mandate of this committee.
Of the committee.
I think that
Those are policy decisions that are beyond us. We're just here to say, okay, this, we certify that this complies with the charter as amended by the court.
Right. I think that for most projects, you might see some sort of trade-off across different categories. That's just going to be the nature of the beast. But there are checks on to what degree the trade-offs are acceptable, be that public engagement, feedback from people who are going to be using the facility.
That's not in our
governing board.
bailiwick. That's not in our bailiwick.
I don't believe so, unless anyone wants to correct me.
Mr. Fernandez, and then Mr. Limke, and then Mr. Chiaramonte.
Thank you, Chair. Johnny, I'm sorry, Dr. Wong, top line, let's just pick on that for a minute. They're giving us to analyze a project that they're estimating 2.2, that's million, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is the message to us that that's the cost of the total project? Or is that simply the cost of the portion of the project that they're asking for funding for from us? As in, top line might actually be a $4 million project, but they're looking to the surtax money to deal with a little better than half of it. Would that be a possibility?
Yes, you're right. And you actually point out an error. Thanks. I need to correct that. So one of the things that's missing from my draft list of projects that was included in the project plan that inspired this mock-up was the project phase. So I didn't indicate that in this project plan, and that was something I forgot to do. I believe that this was phased for construction, if I'm not mistaken. So if it's listed as being funded for the construction phase, you would know that the total cost to build it is $2.2 million. If it is at a PD&E phase or planning phase, I think that will also be indicated in the project plan.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So if, for example, if you saw a project description that said sidewalk on Bayshore Boulevard, $300,000, and it was labeled with planning, you would recognize that $300,000 could be for the planning study, and that there might be another phase to come before you at a later time to actually design and then construct it.
Mr. Limke.
I'm not sure our meetings in the coming months are going to be as long as we maybe think, because I think our job is relatively simple here, is that we see the categories they say they're in, we look at the percentages at the bottom, they match the percentages in the charter, and I don't see that we have much work to do beyond that. But to say, you're right, they're using the money as intended. Is that a wrong interpretation?
I was going to ask a question. I wanted an example of something that we would not look upon favorably. But can you answer Mr. Limsky's question?
Because I think we're not looking at all of them. We're supposed to be looking at the bottom line of this entire amount that they're wanting to spend and see if it matches the percentages.
Honestly, at this point, I'm not entirely sure what to expect in the way of agency project presentations to you. I think that in my conversations with them, they certainly want to deliver on the committee's expectations. They want to meet and provide you with whatever information you feel you need to comfortably make a decision in certifying compliance. So I think if you want to have a 4-hour meeting, that's no problem. I'm almost 100%
I'm not trying to
certain
not have a
that
4-hour
they'd be happy to oblige.
Can I ask counsel if he has, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but what do you think about Mr. Limke's comments?
Yeah, I think he's on track exactly to what the process is. It's basically the expenditure categories, the percentage expenditure estimates, if you will. I think he is in line, and I too am anything but a transportation expert. That would be rather scary if I was to go in that direction. But, just by way of, I'll give you some crazy examples that I would seriously doubt and hope that none of the agencies would submit. But, say for instance, the first category, you saw a water project, some type of facility for a water system. That in and of itself obviously has nothing to do with transportation, let alone any of the particular expenditure categories. That would be something that would be rather hard to certify as in compliance with the charter provisions. Another example that might be a little closer, if, say for instance, in the network improvement category, you would typically see sidewalk improvements, trails, things of that nature. Say there was an intersection improvement, and the intersection improvement was literally just two roads crossing each other, your typical vehicular roads, two roads intersecting. That doesn't seem to fit in that category. So in theory, could you have something that was misplaced? That may be something more in line where that would require a lot more explanation from a government, might not be something that would be compliant with the charter language. And then, of course, the percentages themselves, those are just mathematical computations.
Mr. Abram?
Yeah, I don't think anyone here wants longer meetings. My suggestion in the beginning was that on this first one, we just see how long it takes. I don't think it's going to be that long on the second meeting when we have the second meeting to decide on if these projects fit the categories. And if there's something that raises a red flag, then we question it, So I'm not expecting that all three of these meetings should be 4 hours. That wasn't what my intent was. This first one, if we can get through all of the agencies, and maybe they're shorter than we expect, and we can decide in that second meeting whether they fit the categories.
Mr. Chiramonte, sorry.
Okay, my biggest concern, and we may not have any power over it, I want to know, were these projects funded from another source before they were shifted to this? Because to me, the biggest issue, again, is all those great things you said were going to happen to us will not happen if they don't spend the money that they had in the trend scenario you had, and they simply just shift it over and try to make this tax cover that money. We're going to be in the same position we're in, and I don't believe that's what the citizens in this community wanted. So at least I think that information should be provided to us, whether we can use that as a basis or not of making a decision. But were any of these projects funded from another source that you showed us?
These were all projects that I kind of created.
Okay.
And that information wasn't provided in the project plan that I kind of pulled these from. That's a request that I can pass along to the agencies and ask them to address in the presentation.
I think we need to know that.
Okay. Let me sort of enhance what Ray's talking about, because what he's saying is we want to make sure that each of the four governments' capital improvement program level of funding remains the same or continues to increase it as it has over the years for the various categories. In other words, it doesn't drop because we now have this funding source.
And
that's
go spend it on something else.
Yes.
That's what my concern is.
And maybe that's
Well, at a minimum,
tactfully worded to a
we should ask
Yes.
that question when it's presented to us, but I would also I think we'd all like to see that information provided to us in the submittals that are given to us. Mr. Lemke?
Just to address that a little bit, in my planning at my work, if, I know how much money I have for the next 5 years based on how much I assume I have this year. What I assume these agencies are going to do is speed up everything that they've had planned for the last 20 years.
Yes, that would be great.
That's what I would assume
Okay,
that they're
well,
going to do. That would be
I've
my
been
guess.
in government too long to know that doesn't
For them?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, to Mr. Chiramonte's prior response, that was the assumption with the lottery as well, and it didn't happen.
Mr. Fletcher?
Dr. Wong, I want to kind of build on a hypothetical that that Mr. Hamilton provided, where there's a road, it's under the transportation network category, but it's really just a road intersection. Is there going to be supporting documentation going with these that we could look at to kind of have a first cut as to whether we think that's the case or not? And how would we kind of really answer that question in an instance where it's marginal, which is the appropriate category for the project to go into?
Right. So when we provide you with the project plans to give you opportunity to review, if you have any questions about any particular plan, you can send that question in an email to me, and I will reach out to the agency, try to get an answer, and whatever information or response I get back, I'll circulate to all of the committee members. So you can kind of use me to triage any questions you have, and whatever documentation you feel that you need, again, I keep saying it, to feel comfortable with your certification, I'll work hard with the agencies to make sure that you get it.
Mr. Chair. So to piggyback on that, as a committee, is it our preference to submit our questions to Dr. Wong individually, or do we want to funnel all of that through our chair?
I would tell you that you could go straight to Dr. Wong. How about that?
Yeah,
Mr. Fletcher, you had a question.
I think that might be a violation of sunshine law if you pose
That's
a
true,
question to
yeah.
the chair.
So the engineer certification, would it address these questions? I'm hoping that when we get these, we can look at the documents and kind of be pretty comfortable with the decision as opposed to having a lot of back and forth. I guess I would just encourage that the engineering certification pretty clearly address these questions as to where the projects go, and if there's any kind of ambiguity as to it, have an explanation as to why.
I'm not really certain what documentation is provided to the engineers, but I'll find out and get back to you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is telling us what they're going to do, right? That is telling us what they're going to do, and we believe when they tell us what they're going to do. The audit is there to make sure they did what they told us they were going to do.
Right.
Is that overall how this is supposed to work?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I have one more scenario. I'm building off maybe some of the scenarios. I guess my concern is I think the charter pretty clearly says no new lanes for added automobile capacity.
Yes.
But what if we get a project that just says, hey, we want you to build sidewalks, but that project is for the money is coming from somewhere else for new lanes, and it's a new 8-lane highway, and we're just putting sidewalks on it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I worry a little bit about that will be used for the extra and those other projects, which maybe was your concern from earlier.
Well, that's a different concern. If they build a new 8-lane road, they should be adding sidewalks as part of that construction, to me.
It should not be waiving sidewalks.
Right. Those are the kind of things I'm concerned about, because then the overall amount of money we were going to have gets reduced, and the money goes somewhere else.
Sure.
Right. I'm just concerned that I don't even know what the right questions to ask. That's kind of where I'm getting to, and so we need to make sure that we're able to do that. Mr. Warlison.
Just on Ray's point, I couldn't agree with you more, 150%. But my question is this committee responsible to determine that?
Probably not, but we could still talk about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to make sure that. I'm sorry?
Our bully pulpit, as she said.
And I agree. I just want us to make sure we're focused on what our statutory requirement is, and that we make sure we fulfill that. And as far as the other part, I agree with you. But you know what? That's the county commissioner's job, and the public has got to hold them accountable for that. That's enough.
But they won't hold them accountable if they don't even know it's happening.
Right. Right. But we can assist in that, I
Yes.
think. Okay.
I would certainly like a refresher. You did this at, I think, our first meeting. Under what scenarios can we not certify? What are the reasons for us to not look upon something favorably? So whether you send that to us, or I'd like that before the next meeting. Just you did a presentation on that. Yes, Mr. Rawls.
As a for instance, if they tell us they're going to spend $1.8 million on safety improvements, but $530,000 of that is for software, that's not a compliance spending. How would we know that?
I think that might be revealed at the conclusion of the audit. At the public hearing in April, you'll be presented with the results of the audit. And so if some sort of misappropriation of funds has occurred, you would know and have an opportunity to take action at that time.
Okay.
And I think that point that I've heard several of you make probably shouldn't be overstated. That I'm not entirely certain whether it's within the committee's jurisdiction, I guess, to, well, I don't know what leverage you have in the way of ensuring that funds aren't being reallocated to other purposes. But one of the things that this committee does have is a voice and media coverage. And possibly at a later time, we'd like to bring before you some opportunities to raise the profile of this committee and do some public information activities, maybe talk about processes for communicating messages to the public.
So,
yes.
One point we continue to bounce over is the cities have already approved and governments already approved their capital improvement program, I think, for next year, beginning October 1st, so it's already approved. But a word of caution or concern we might express to them is that the level of service for, as an example, their other capital improvement efforts from their various funding sources, would remain the same as we look at funding or reviewing their projects for the sales tax. Somehow wording it so that they don't diminish, as we've been talking about. And it's very easy to start hedging that as the engineers, and I'm not blaming engineers, but as instead of $2 million, they should have put $1 million, and instead of having $20 million in a capital improvement program, they have 18 this next year, and they have 15 the next year. And I think it's worth us saying it in advance, the same level of funding or more as their general budget funds for capital improvements. Pro rata goes up or down. We would encourage them to please consider that so that we can look at the use of these funds for what the intent of the citizens were when they approved this somehow. That ought to be said up front instead of at the end of our consideration.
I agree. I don't know what,
I don't know how to-
clearly staff is communicating with you and asking what the preference of this committee is. I think you can feel safe to tell them that we've mentioned several times, we want the trends to remain where they are and this not be icing. Maybe we should talk about how to directly communicate that at the meeting prior to any presentation too, Mr. Hunter. Yes, Judge.
Having heard, and I agree 100% with that, but in just my casual glancing of the charter amendment, I don't see anything in here that would prohibit a government, if they so choose, to use this surplus, assuming it continues to exist, to fund their whatever improvements they had in the bucket already, and use that other money for swimming pools or whatever else they want.
But I don't think that that's what the voters wanted.
It
and
may
I
not
think
be,
it should be talked
but
about.
it appears to me that there's no prohibition in the amendment to a government doing that, although I think it was the intent that this be used to
I think at least we
enhance.
should know if these are projects that were not funded before.
And again, we could express our thoughts that, while this may
I'm going to ask them that.
be certifiable under the charter, it really is a shame that you're not,
No, I mean, we've asked for a certain legal opinion on
Yeah.
our ability to base a certification on that.
Good.
Yes.
I agree. I think as a board, one of the things we need to decide is to what extent we want to engage in advocacy. The MPO has the Citizens Advisory Committee. They have no, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Wong, no authority but they play a very important role in advocacy. And when we're talking about doing what we can to make sure the agencies comply with what the voters voted for, I think ultimately we would be doing that in the role of an advocate, not something that the charter amendment gives us authority to do. But it's also something that I think could be a really important component to what this board does. But that's also something I think we should talk about and agree on, because that's an extension of what we're strictly here to accomplish.
I think we should accomplish giving the public accurate information so they know what's going on.
We are going to, at the next meeting, talk about the public face of this board and what you all would like to see and how we might do that. That is something that staff is going to make a presentation about, and we'll talk about that directly. Mr. Rawls.
Very quickly, and thank you for your patience. I think we need to be careful about advocacy. I really do. We're not here to advocate, in my opinion. We're here to verify, And so I think we could play a lot of roles, but I think we have to be careful about what role we play, and we need to make sure that our mission is well defined and that we have a path to achieving that mission. And try not to go down too many rabbit holes. It's going to be tough enough as it is, and I'm not criticizing, but I'm just bringing up another point of view on that. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fletcher.
I want to go back to the question I had earlier, which is when we get the materials, if it's something along this line, I'm going to have a lot of questions around how do we know that it meets the criteria in the charter. And I guess I would just kind of put out there is if the agencies don't provide a sufficient detail to make that decision, we may be looking, or I might be looking to you or whoever the appropriate technical people are to kind of help validate that we are within the bounds of the charter. And that's not something we really talked about today, but I did kind of want to put that out there. Or maybe we go back to the agency and just ask for more information. But I think it's going to be important to know that to use Mr. Hamilton's example, that network improvements really are the bike and walkable improvements and not just a road intersection.
In addition to whatever documentation we can provide prior, we can also ask the agencies to send a member of the engineering staff so that they can be on hand to answer questions.
If this committee, Chip, feels that we don't have enough information to decide whether it's in compliance or not, could we then decide we're not certifying because of the lack of information? Is that something that is within our purview? I would think it would be.
Sure. Mr. Rawlison, you have a question?
Just an observation. In my line of work, we do a lot of auditing, and there are certain levels of information that you look to and you drill down in testing and certain things like that to certain details. I think what we may need to try and do is to frame an approach here as to what level of information we're looking at to make our decision and how deep we need to drill into that data. For instance, if I'm reading an engineering report, I'm reading Chinese, okay? I have no clue. If I'm reading this type of report that tells me we've certified that these funds will go into this area which complies with the ordinance, then in that case, I might have a shot at making a good decision. But the thing that we're struggling with right now, I think, is what detail of information are we required to look at to make the decision that this board is charged with doing? I don't know the answer to that yet, but when we start getting these reports, I think we can start having that discussion and really frame an approach that will be effective, efficient, and accurate to the point that we're not having 5-6 hour meetings. We may not need to do that until we get those documents and until we actually see the data. We're really flying blind. So if we can, I think as soon as we get some of that, we'll make some good decisions. But I understand the struggle, and we'll try and assist in helping in how we can do that. Okay, thanks.
Yes, Mr. Hunter.
Every one of these projects, there is a project file that's probably 5 or 15 pages thick. And there's an engineer normally that's sitting in the audience ready to answer questions. I've seen these as they come before local governments. Now, it's up to us, as to the level of detail we want to get into, but there is a staff person ready with that information for all the numbers and words that are up there. It's just up to us to let them know in advance if we want to keep moving through it.
That's right. And some of these projects that are appearing in the plans, most of them will probably not be construction. Many of them might be at an earlier phase, like design or planning, something like that, in which case the documentation for the benefits may not be prepared yet. That may be a part of what the surtax money is being used for, is to evaluate the benefits if they decide to move it forward to construction. And Mr. Hunter was right. For some of these projects, a complete streets project or safety project, for example, will probably have a planning study available for you all to look at, and it can include information that the project manager prepared, like traffic counts, number of cyclists, number of pedestrians. They'll do a review of conflict points, things like that. If you want to dig into the details, that's totally fine. We can provide you with, again, whatever you feel you need to make a decision comfortably.
We're not sure till we start doing it. I think that's the easy answer. So are you done with your presentation, Mr. Dr.
I've got 2 more slides. I'll be real quick. So I think our first suggestion for how to formulate like a mental checklist would be, are the projects categorized correctly? And there's a number of resources that you can use to help you do that. And the second criterion in the checklist applies to the agencies that have to abide by the allocation formula. So that's Hart, Hillsborough County, and the city of Tampa. And the second thing that you would be looking at is, do the expenditures in each project category match the allocation formula as they're outlined in the ordinance? And so you might look at what the sum is for all of the project categories for each project, do a simple sum, and then divide by the total amount of the expenditure, come up with the percentages. And maintenance and vulnerability, for example, that project category requires at least 20% of the surtax revenue to go toward funding those projects. Congestion reduction, I believe, is either 26 or 27%. So anything greater than 26 or 27%, you're good. Safety improvements, again, that's either 26 or 27%. I get the 2 mixed up. Network improvements, 12% or more of the money has to go there. And you may see some projects that are using remaining funds. That's revenue that can be used to fund any of these categories. And if the division checks out, that might be another sign that you should certify compliance. And lastly, something that we already mentioned, are any of the expenses prohibited by the governing law? So not to pick on the airport, for example, but there is nothing in the charter language about using this revenue to build a new airfield. So if you happen to see an airport pop up, you would say, hey, that's not an authorized expense. All right. And so our staff attorney provided us with some language that might make for an appropriate motion if you were to certify compliance, and that could be that you move to certify that the projects in the agency's project plan comply with governing law. And that covers everything that Mr. Hamilton mentioned already, Florida state statutes, Article 11, anything in the interlocal that's appropriate or relevant, and the county ordinance.
Judge Menendez.
I think I had requested earlier copies of the Judge Barbas's decision as well as the recent ordinance. Could I also get a copy of the interlocal agreement? And perhaps, although I can look it up, it'd be easier if you could just include it in an email to everybody, that Florida statute, so that we could have that material.
All the documents that exist are on the website. I'll be happy to download everything, put it in a file, and email it out so that everyone has it accessible via email and website.
Where are the materials for this? I'm just asking because I'm curious for this board meeting, because there's some things you're going through that weren't in the electronic agenda.
Right, the PowerPoint presentations we didn't include in the agenda packet because they weren't ready yet. We were working on them up until a couple hours before this meeting.
That's fine.
But in the agenda packet, you'll see that the agenda is laid out, and each item has a write-up, like a couple paragraph summary of what the item is going to cover. And then if there are any attachments for that particular item, they'll be right after that.
And you'll include these PowerPoints, they'll get uploaded to the website at some point?
We hadn't planned on putting them on the website because they eat up a lot of space on our site, but we can
How else
provide
would
you
I,
with a download.
how else would I get the PowerPoints if they weren't electronic and they're not on the website?
I can email them to you as soon as they're ready.
Okay, yeah, we need, I would say we need those documents sent to us just so we have them. Mr. Lim.
One quick point. So there's the sample language for this motion. In the letter from Hart's General Counsel, they recommended that, but also saying something like, we approve the project plan if that authority is reinstated. So I don't know, I would love to hear about that, because I think we're flying blind a little bit, because this goes before the Supreme Court in February, is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, I can address that, though. I would very strongly recommend you not do that, because current law, that is not your authority. If we had a circumstance where that authority was reinstated, I think there would be more than sufficient time. If you had the prior certification, there'd likewise be an approval, but they're really two different animals. And I really would not want to advise you to take an action that's outside
So we would
your
just step
authority.
back and redo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Rawls. Thank you. Let's suppose that we go through the process and we've certified, approved, done whatever, and the projects move forward, they're funded, and they're completed. And let's say that we missed something. We had an intersection that didn't comply or whatever that monies were spent on, and that came out in the audit. What happens then?
That's an issue I can't speak to. I'm not certain. I would probably wait until we get a representative from the clerk's office and pose that question.
Let's find out. Thank you.
Any other, are you done with your presentation? Yes. All right. Any questions, or we've asked a lot while that was going. We appreciate that. Thank you. Let's move on to any old business or new business we might have. I think we got into some good discussions that we needed to get into, and we'll get some answers on some of the issues we asked about. All right. We are ready to go. Then I will adjourn the meeting unless someone has an objection to that. Otherwise, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.